Hey everyone, Tristan back with another video, and in this video we're taking a listen to and reviewing the Universal Audio Volt 276 USB audio interface. First of all, right now you're just listening to the raw audio with no processing or anything like that, no EQ, no compressor or anything. This is just the raw audio, only adjusting for levels. So before going into the device specifics itself, let's talk about what my audio setup is currently that you're listening to. This is the Shure SM7B microphone. It is connected to a Triton Audio FET head, which is an inline preamp, and the XLR cable I'm using is Mogami 2459, and that's going directly into one of the XLR inputs of the Universal Audio 276 device. Now, this is not just an ordinary USB audio interface because it has some built-in effects, and we'll talk about that in this video. The 276 moniker means that it actually is based on the Universal Audio 1176 compressor, which is a very highly sought-after compressor in the recording studio world. It's an outboard compressor. It's a separate piece of hardware that's quite expensive and quite sought after, and people really like it. It's called the Universal Audio 1176. So when Universal Audio came out with this device that has that basically built in for only like $300, a lot of people were pretty excited. Now, I do have to say it's not exactly the same as the outboard 1176 compressor, because the compressor in this unit, the Volt 276, just has presets. So it has like 4 different presets that you can set. Whereas the outboard 1176 compressor that is used in professional recording studios has many more settings and actually has dials on it that you can actually tweak a lot more closely and things like that. But this does replicate the 1176 compressor sound pretty well with the built-in presets. So that is really definitely a benefit of this device. And at only about $300, I think it's a pretty good bargain. Now, as I mentioned, I'm using the Triton Audio FET head preamp inline in my XLR here, and that's mainly just so I can get a lower level on the input gain on the Volt 276. It works perfectly fine without it, although I find that I have to be almost near the max, almost near at 100 with this particular microphone without using the Triton Audio FET head. So I find that it provides a nicer, cleaner sound and signal when using the Triton Audio FET head inline. And also for the purposes of this video, where I'm testing the inbuilt compressor and features and stuff like that, I wanted a little bit more headroom. So that's why I have that in line. But also I just think it provides a nicer signal and sound as well. Do note that the built-in preamps on the Volt 276 are plenty strong, so you don't necessarily need something like this if you don't mind being like 80 to 100% up, on your input level. So let's first talk about the build quality of this and the design. As you can see, it's got a really cool retro look to it with wood paneling on the sides, and it's got the LED buttons on it that you can press, and it just has a really cool overall kind of retro aesthetic. I don't know if it's like 1950s, 60s, or 70s, but it is retro, and it just looks really cool. It's something that looks cool on the desk, and it's just not your basic black box or something like that. It has good metering indicators so that you can set your levels pretty accurately, although it would be nice if it had a little bit more LEDs to get an even more accurate level. But in general, it's better than some that don't even have those at all. So it does have the bar graph kind of LEDs on it as well. The chassis of it is metal, so it's not doesn't have a real plasticky feel. It definitely has a metal build quality to it, and underneath the wood panel it is metal as well. The only things that are plastic are the sort of middle gray part and the dials, for the level and volume and things like that. Overall, just a very cool look and aesthetic. Now, they have a few different models. This one is the Volt 276, which has 2 inputs, and the inputs can be used for not only XLR microphones, but also 1/4-inch microphones as well. And then you can also attach instruments into it as well, such as guitars, so it's not just for microphones. They also have a 176 model, which just has 1 input, and then they have a 476 model which has 4 inputs as well. And then if you don't need the built-in compressor, they have just what they call the Volt without the 76 moniker. And those have a pretty much identical sound without the compressor, although they have a different look. They don't have the sort of wood paneling, and they don't have as much of a retro look. So the front panel has the 2 XLR and 1/4-inch inputs, and then you also have a headphone jack to monitor your audio with a headphone level dial as well. And then on the top panel, you have 3 dials. You have your 2 input level dials, and then you have a monitor level dial on the right, and then you have a direct button as well under that, so that you can actually take audio out of this and not even use a computer. You don't even have to use USB audio out of this if you don't want to, and you can actually just use like an external recorder or something like that and use this as a standalone device as well. So you don't have to only use it in conjunction with a computer, which is really kind of cool. Can totally function as a standalone device. And then here is the back panel. Of course you've got your USB-C output to go into the computer, and then you've got a MIDI output, and then you've also got your 1/4 inch outputs as well. And then the great thing about this device, which is a must-have as far as I'm concerned, is a power switch. So you can actually turn the power off when you're not using it, which is really nice. A lot of the USB audio interfaces on the market don't even have a power switch, and they're just made to be left on all the time when you're using your computer, or you're supposed to just unplug it from the USB when you don't want it powered on. So I really do like having the power switch. So far you have been listening just to the raw audio going right into the device without any of the buttons or features on. But let's go ahead and test that now. So the first thing is it has a vintage mode. So right now you're listening to it without the vintage mode on. Now I'm going to turn the vintage mode on. So now we've got the vintage mode on, and what this vintage mode is supposed to do is give it more of a slightly warm sound signature, more of a tube-like sound signature, and I think it's really nice. Now it's quite subtle, but again, this is with it on, and now let's turn it off for comparison. And this is with the vintage mode off. This is with the vintage mode off. And now this is with the vintage mode on. And as I do all these different audio tests in this video, please leave a comment, let me know what you think sounds better. Now let's go ahead and turn on the compressor. Right now the compressor is off, but I have now switched the compressor on to the vocal compressor. It's labeled VOC, and as I mentioned, this has different toggles. So as you press the compressor button, it toggles through the different modes. So this is with the vocal compressor on, and I think this is normally how I would probably use it when I'm using it for voice. I would have the vintage mode on and the vocal compressor mode on. Now let's turn the compressor onto the guitar mode. Now this is the guitar mode. It's labeled GTR, and this is typically for guitars, obviously, but you can play around and experiment and use it on voices. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Or if you don't use a guitar, use a different instrument, you can use it on that. But in this video, we're just pretty much testing my voice with the different levels. So this is the guitar mode compressor. Now let's turn it onto the fast mode. This is the fast mode compressor. Fast mode is typically used for things like drums. That's where you typically use it. But this is the fast mode on my voice. And now let's go ahead and turn the compressor completely off. And now the compressor is completely off. The vintage mode is still on. But this is the compressor mode off. And now let's turn the vintage mode off again. And now we're back just to the standard, no processing or anything like that. And so now all the onboard effects are off. And now we're back to the standard raw audio. Now let's go back to what I think is my favorite mode, which is the vintage mode on and the vocal compressor on. Vocal compressor mode. So that's what we're on now. As I mentioned, I think this is probably the mode that I would use most of the time, but maybe you be the judge. Let me know what mode you think sounded the best. The thing that I think is really cool about the Volt 276, in some ways it's kind of like having a guitar pedal for your USB interface, which is kind of cool. You have these different modes that you can set to kind of tailor the sound before you actually have to do anything in post-processing. So like using the compressor, I don't have to add any additional compressor to my voice, in post, which is really kind of nice. The less I have to do with digitally in post, the better, which I think is a real benefit. And these aren't like digital effects or anything like that. These are actually onboard analog effects built into the Universal Audio Volt 276 device. So again, it's almost kind of like having a guitar pedal for your voice or for your USB audio interface. So all in all, I think for the price, this is a really cool USB audio interface. Again, it's like $300, and you're getting some of that Universal Audio 1176 compressor effect built right into it, and some of that sound, which I think is really kind of cool. And I just love the look of this, and I love the build quality of this. I just think it's a really cool device in that respect. and it just gives a really good overall sound. And also, I forgot to mention, it does also have phantom power as well. And when you activate the phantom power, it doesn't just click on, it actually gradually ramps up. It'll blink for a few seconds until it powers up completely, and that's really nice to avoid like damaging microphones and things like that. So it kind of gently turns on, which I think is a really nice feature. Now, one negative about the phantom power is that when you activate the phantom power, it activates it on all the inputs. So on the 276, it's activating the phantom power on both inputs. It would be nice if each input had its own phantom power. That way, if you're using two microphones, one that requires phantom power and one that doesn't, then you could actually do that. But with this, when you turn on the 48-volt phantom power, it activates that across the board on both inputs. So, if you're using two different microphones like that, where one does not use phantom power, you can actually get a separate device like something by Triton Audio that goes in that will actually block the phantom power from one of the microphones. So that is a possible workaround to that. But it would, however, be nice if the two inputs had their own individual phantom power switches on them. And by the way, internally this uses a Cirrus Logic internal ADC and DAC DAC. It's not necessarily one of the most modern DACs inside. However, the Cirrus Logic is also what Apple uses as well. So I think it's a pretty high quality DAC, and I don't really have any complaints about that. And in the end, you really have to just go by the overall end sound that you're getting out of the device. And I'm very happy with the sound of the Universal Audio 276. I think it sounds really good for my needs. And I really do like having the onboard vintage mode and the onboard compressor based on the Universal Audio 1176 compressor as well. So all in all, for about $300, I think this is a really nice USB audio interface. Certainly if you don't need the inbuilt processing and things like that, you can get one of the lower models. I really like having the compressor and the vintage mode built right in, and I just love the vintage look of this device. And again, for the majority of this video, you have been listening to the device with the vintage mode on and the compressor on vocal mode, again with the Shure SM7B microphone. For pricing and availability on the Universal Audio 276, see the description field. And for community and discussion, I will see you in the comments. And if you thought this video was cool, give it a thumbs up. If you thought it sucked, give it a thumbs down. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video.